Hello and welcome to this video tutorial brought to you by Tutvid.com. Today we're going to take a look at creating this slide to unlock feature made oh so famous by the Apple iPhone and the Apple iPod Touch. Basically, you just click and drag, slide, and you unlock the icons. They all come sliding in, everything else fades out. So we're going to take a look at how to create that. Now, this is a copy of the iPhone which I created in Photoshop. I'm calling it the My Phone. Yeah, I know that's pretty cheesy, but the My Phone. I'm going to come over here into the bridge, and you can see I have the myphone.psd, and this is available for download. It's one of the files you will receive when you subscribe to the newsletter on the Tutvid.com site. If you run over to Tutvid.com, on the front page, you'll see it right there on the right-hand side. There is a little sign-up form. You just need your email address and your name, and you should have the files sitting in your email very shortly. And this is one of the files, the myphone.psd. It is a fully layered PSD file, and it's quite large. And that's what we're going to start with. Now, you don't need this file to follow along. You know, by all means, you can use your own file or files. Do it however you like. So before we get started, I'm just going to double click on this to open this up in Photoshop, and we're going to take a look at it. You can see it is a pretty large file here, a little on the large side. So the first thing we want to do is size this thing down, and really that's all we need to do here in Photoshop is size this down. So I'm going to hit Control-Alt-I. If you're on a Mac, that would be Command-Option-I. That brings up the image size dialog box. The only thing we're worried about here is height. We just want this thing to be 600 pixels high or lower, so we're just going to set the height to 600. Hit OK. And there we have it. Now I'm ready to save this out, so I'm going to hit Control-Shift or Command-Shift-S. This is my save as, and I already have the myphone sized.psd. I'm going to double click on that because I just want to replace that. Hit OK, and we are ready to head over to Flash and get started on our little slider. Well, here is the slider that I've already created, and you can see the whole iPhone is actually here in Flash already. We, however, are going to start from a new document. So I'm just going to save this document. I'm going to leave it open in case I need to make a quick reference to it as far as what I did. It does get a little tricky, not really action scripting wise, but just, well, you'll see in just a second. There are a lot of layers that come in from Photoshop. So we're going to go File, New, and we're going to create a new Flash file, Actionscript 3.0. Hit OK. Here's our file. The first thing we want to do is come over to the Properties panel, down under the Properties section, hit the Edit button to the right-hand side of Size. This opens up the document properties. We want to resize our document, make it 400 pixels by 620, excuse me. And background color can stay white. Frame rate, I recommend you stay at 30 frames per second or more. Hit OK. There we go. So here's our document. We are now ready to drag our iPhone or my phone in. So I'm going to come over to the bridge, and here we have it, the myphone size.psd. I'm just going to drag it right over and drop it on the Flash document. Flash is going to take a second to think, and it's going to give me, well, there it is already, the import dialog box. And basically it's saying, okay, check the Photoshop layers to import. I know I want to import this entire frame group. I know I want to import this entire shadow group. The screen inner glow I do not want to import, so I'm going to uncheck that. That's just there for in Photoshop. I happen to know that this layer will cause us issues, if we leave it here in the PSD and we try to work with it in Flash. So if we want that inner glow, we'll just recreate it in Flash. It's no big deal. Here, the startup interface, we're going to take everything in there. And under icon interface, we want to uncheck the main screen area. This is essentially just that backdrop that sits behind all the icons, just the main screen area, the black background. We're going to recreate this in Flash as well. And of course, creating it in Flash, you can use vector artwork, and you can always just go and place your own custom image as well if you like. We are converting these layers to Flash layers, not keyframes. We're placing the layers at their original position. Excuse me, and we are not going to set the size of the stage to the same size as that Photoshop document. Remember, we just resized our stage. So we're going to hit OK, and you can see it builds our PSD. Now, right now, our PSD is kind of right up in the corner, so we probably want to align this more to the middle of our stage. Let's go ahead and do that. Basically what I want to do is just hit Command or Control A. That's going to select everything. That is everything that is not on a locked layer, and nothing here is locked up. I'm going to back this out just a little bit and be Control and the minus key. I'm going to use the zoom tool and just zoom it a little bit closer. Yeah, just enough so we can, still see everything, but we're not, zoomed way out. So now that I have everything selected, I'm going to grab my move tool and I'm just going to move it sort of, over and down a little bit to, semi-position it. We're not, exactly positioning it or anything. We're not really worried about that. Just moving it off of that edge. All right, next up, we're going to open up our timeline tab by double-clicking timeline. I'm going to stretch this all the way up to the top. You can see we have a whole bunch of frames here, but really it's not nearly as intimidating as it looks. We can come in here and we can just start collapsing these folders. So I'm going to collapse the button folder, then the frame folder, and I'm going to collapse the shadow folder, and the slider and bars folder, and then the startup interface folder. Icons and lower gray dock all belong to the icon interface folder. So you can see it really breaks down to the 4 main folders that we had in our PSD. It just imports them. It keeps all of that intact, so that's great. We can see here that layer 1 is blank. We don't need that. I can just come down here, select the garbage can to dump that. Now we're going to begin sort of compiling our layers into movie clips. Now I know we're not going to be doing anything with the frame. That's just going to sit there. So I'm going to close up the frame folder, and I'm going to lock up the other 3 folders, and I'm going to select everything on the stage. And what that's going to do for me is select everything inside of that frame folder, right, like that. I'm going to come up here to modify and convert this to a symbol, and I'm just going to call it MC Frame Master. So this is just that metallic frame. You can see the button is selected. It looks like the earpiece is selected. Some of these other frame pieces, they're all selected. They all belong to that group. We don't need any of that, so we're not going to mess around with it. Type here, make sure it's set to movie clip, and the registration for now we're going to leave to the top left-hand corner. Hit OK, and there we have that. Now we come back in here to our timeline. You're going to see, oh, didn't mean to do that. When I open up the frame folder, everything has been compiled onto just the top layer. So I'm going to drag that layer out of the group, and I'm going to select the group and just dump the entire group. So deleting this layer folder will delete all the layers nested within it. Are you really sure you want to do this? Yes, we want to dump all of that junk. So here we now have compiled and what's the word I'm looking for? Condensed all of that stuff into one movie clip, so we now have it just on one layer. And if we wanted to go in and mess around with the frame later on, we still could. We could use instance names. We could go inside of this movie clip and start giving things instance names. So we're really leaving ourselves open for a whole lot of customization later on down the road. So now we want to take care of the shadow. You can see that the shadow looks pretty bad. I mean, you can definitely tell that we used 3 different shapes to create the shadow, and they didn't really come through all that great. So really all I'm going to do is create a new layer. We're going to create a brand new shadow. So hit the new layer button, double click to rename the layer shadow, and what I'm going to do is just use what I have there sort of as a template. What size is the shadow? So I'm going to grab my oval tool. Hotkey, by the way, note is O. And I'm just going to draw a very long, thin oval. I want to make sure, however, I have no stroke on this. Color doesn't matter right now. So I'm just going to draw out a nice, long, thin oval, like so. I'm going to select it, sort of shift it over a little bit. And what I'm going to do now is just fill it with black. So I'm going to select from my color picker here and just choose black. There we go. We filled it with black. I am going to now hit the F8 key, which is the hotkey for converting this to a symbol. There you go. Convert to symbol. And I'm going to say MC Shadow. And now that we have our shadow in place, we can delete this entire shadow folder. So I'm going to delete that. Are you sure you want to delete? Yes, we are. And you can see we have this very harsh-edged shadow. It's no big deal because it's a movie clip. It's as easy as coming up here to our filters menu right here. You can see it. There it is. Choose the new filter button right here, or the add filter button rather, right there. And that is dropping off screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my library again and just sort of squash it down a little bit. Yep, add new filter, and we're going to say blur. And you can see we have our blur options that show up in here. We're going to blur this. Let's try 15. That'll probably look pretty good. There we go. 15 is decent. Now all we need to do is just drag this beneath that frame. So we're going to drag the shadow layer below the frame layer, and there we have it. We have a much better looking shadow. Not quite as realistic as it looked when it was in Photoshop, but hey, it gets us through the night, if you know what I'm saying. So there we go. We have our frame and our shadow all set up. Next up is the startup interface. And actually, the startup interface, we're going to have to do something a little tricky with because our slider is actually located within the startup interface. So we're going to bypass that for a second and just quickly convert the icon interface. I'm going to drag the icon interface above the startup interface for a second, by the way. and we're going to convert this whole thing to a symbol. So I'm going to unlock that. I'm going to lock up the shadow. I'm going to lock up the frame. Again, I'm doing this. So here, if I select all, I'm just selecting everything here within the icon interface layer or layer folder. And we're going to go modify, convert to symbol, and we're going to name this guy MC Icons Interface. Again, this is a movie clip symbol. Hit OK. There we have it. I am going to stretch this out a little bit, open up the icons interface, open up icons. You can see everything has been loaded up onto this right icons copy folder. I'm actually going to double click that and just name it icons interface, and we're going to drag it out of this folder right like that. I can now select this folder and throw it in the garbage. Yes, we want to get rid of that. Icons interface is now its own movie clip on its own layer. Very nice. Okay, so last but not least, we have the startup interface. I'm actually going to shut off the icons interface just by selecting that dot below the eye. There we go. And we're going to work on the startup interface here because we want to split the slider and the text and the groove that the slider slides in. We want that to be a separate movie clip, and we want that to be on its own layer because that kind of has to be above everything else. So what we're going to do is we're going to open this guy up, and you can see that conveniently I have placed the slider stuff inside its own layer group here. There we go. I have all of it selected. Now that that's all selected, I can go modify, convert to symbol, and I'm going to name this MC Slider. Again, it's a movie clip, as you saw just a second ago. And now it's all in the slide to unlock layer. I'm going to double click the slide to unlock layer. I'm going to name it slider. I'm going to drag this right up beneath the icons interface layer. Okay, so we're out of the startup interface. Now, the last thing we need to do here in the startup interface, well, let's lock up that slider layer so we don't accidentally select it and group that into a movie clip we don't want it to be in. We now have our background image and these bars with the time and the bar here that comes across and holds our slider. So I can really just hit Command or Control A to select the rest of that stuff, and all of that goes into its own movie clip. Modify, convert to symbol, and we are just about ready to get started scripting here. I'm going to name this MC, let's just name it Startup. Why not? MC Startup, it's a movie clip. So all of that has been compiled into this Monday, March 23rd, 2009 layer. So I'm going to double click that, and I'm just going to name it Startup Interface. There we have it. I'm going to drag that right up beneath the slider layer. Now, this entire Startup Interface folder, as we have done with all the other folders, can now be dumped in the garbage. Yes, get rid of it. I never want to see it again. So now that we have this, we're ready to start coding the slider. The first thing we want to do to this slider is set it up so we can talk to it using Actionscript. That's going to require us to get inside of this movie clip that we just created with the slider button and the groove and all of that stuff, and start giving some instance names. Really, we just need to give one instance name, and then we will begin writing our action script so this thing can slide. That's going to be the first step. Get the button sliding, then make stuff happen when it slides to a certain point. So let's get started doing that right now. So the first step to scripting this is giving those instance names that I mentioned just a second ago. So we're going to unlock the slider layer, and actually the first thing I'm going to do is drag it all the way up to the top. The reason I want it to be all the way up at the top is because I want no movie clip on the stage to obstruct the mouse's feel of this button. This is going to be above everything else, so we will definitely know when the mouse is clicking on it. Even transparent areas of movie clips can block out the mouse's ability to click on this button. So we just want to do this a simple and easy way and just drag this layer right up to the top and not worry about having to work with any kind of really complex action script or anything like that. So simple and easy, drag that slider layer all the way up to the top and unlock it. Now the first thing we want to do, because we know we're going to be talking to a movie clip within this movie clip, we need to give this movie clip an instance name. So if I haven't tied you up in knots with those movie clips, let's name this guy Slider Master, and that's Master with a capital M, by the way. Just remember that all these instance names are case sensitive while you're working with this. Underscore MC. I like to end all of my movie clips underscore MC, buttons underscore BTN, etc., etc., etc. So Slider Master underscore MC. Now that we've done that, double click to get inside of it. We basically have 4 bitmap graphics in here. Our groove, our bit of text, the arrow on the button, and the button. So what I want to do is just select all of this stuff, select all 4 things, right click, and, well, I'm moving off screen here. Select all 4 graphics, right click, and hit distribute to layers. You can see I now have an empty layer 1, it's completely blank. We can dump that in the garbage. I have the slide to unlock, which I believe would be my text. The arrow, it's pretty self-explanatory. The slider, and the groove. So what I want to do, the groove and the slide to unlock, they can go at the bottom. I don't really care about them, so I'm going to grab slide to unlock and drag it right above groove. The arrow and slider, however, I want them to become a movie clip, so I'm going to select both of them like so. Okay, I just selected both of the keyframes there, and I'm going to hit F8 to convert them to a symbol. I'm going to call these guys MC Slider. MC Slider Inner, actually. And you can see that they have moved up to the arrow layer. I'm actually just going to rename that arrow layer slider and get rid of this lower slider layer. So delete that layer, and we're left with this just single slider layer, and that holds our slider. We need to give this an instance name because this is the movie clip we're going to be directly talking to when we're saying, hey, when somebody clicks on this, we want you to slide. We want you to move all over the place. So, well, not all over the place. We're going to restrict it to only a certain area in just a moment. But for now, we're just going to get this thing moving. So, up here in the Properties panel, give this guy an instance name of Slider BTN. Oop, accidentally flipped caps lock on. BTN underscore MC, because this is still a movie clip. Even though we're calling it a button, it is still a movie clip symbol. So, technically, Flash only knows it as a movie clip. Alright, we're going to come back out to scene 1, which is the root level of our Flash document here. And we're going to create a new layer. This is going to be our Actionscript layer. I'm going to double click on it and name it AS. Now, I'm going to select that first keyframe, and we are going to begin scripting. Hit the F9 key to bring up the Actions panel. Now, the first thing I want to do, create the event listeners, which are going to basically say, hey, somebody's clicking on me, or hey, somebody just stopped clicking on me. So we're going to create them right now. We're going to say slider master underscore MC. Remember, that is the name of the movie clip which contains our slider. Dot slider BTN underscore MC. That's our actual slider. Dot add event listener. And we're listening for an event which is a mouse event. The mouse event we're listening for is mouse, all in caps, underscore down, all in caps, comma. When it detects or hears somebody clicking down on that movie clip, we want it to execute the function slider drag F, close parenthesis, semicolon. And right here below, we're actually going to copy that line of code, so I'm going to move right up here, and I'm just going to hold down Shift and hit the End key, which is going to select that entire line of code, Command or Control C to copy it, move down, and Command or Control V to paste that guy right in. Move back to the front of this bit of code. And when we're detecting a mouse up, because I'm going to come over here to mouse event and switch mouse down to mouse up. And by the way, when the mouse goes up, we want this to execute the function slider stop F. But typically when I'm working with a slider, usually this is more so the case with volume sliders. If the button's very small, sometimes you want to say, you want to throw like a dot stage in here. So if somebody lets go of the mouse when they're just over the stage, it will, stop dragging that button, because a lot of times it can be difficult to keep the mouse button on a very small button. In this case, I don't really think it'll be a problem, so we're going to leave this as is. Maybe later on, if we find we have the need, we'll come in here and throw basically just look like this right in there. So no big deal. We can work with that if we need it later on. But right now, I think we're good. So I'm going to hit enter or return a couple times, and we're going to begin writing our functions. I'm going to say function, and the name of the function, we're going to say slider drag F, and open parenthesis, I'm going to say event. You can say event, you can say EVT, you can just put the letter E. But whatever you do, just keep it constant throughout your document. So I'm using event, so we're going to have to stick with the word event here. So event, mouse event, close parenthesis, colon, and the word void. Open curly bracket, enter, return twice, close curly bracket, and hit the up arrow key. Now that we're within this function, we're basically just going to say, hey, slider master underscore MC dot slider BTN underscore MC dot start drag, and an open parenthesis. And the first thing you can see here, the little tooltip is saying is, hey, do you want to lock the center? This is a Boolean this is, Boolean. It's basically yes or no. It's true or false, really, is what it is. So we have to say, do you want to lock center or not? And basically, locking center is when somebody selects it, do you want this button or do you want the person's mouse to snap to the center of this button? In this case, no, we don't want that. We want this to just be wherever you grab the button, you can fling it right across. So I'm going to say false. And I'm going to close the parenthesis. Close parenthesis. And now in here, we're going to come back in a little bit and we're going to put our restrictions as far as where this slider is allowed to go. But right now, we're just going to get this thing dragging and then not dragging when we're not clicking on it. Then just place that semicolon at the end right there. Now we're going to copy this entire function. So I'm going to select the whole thing, Command or Control C, hit enter, return once down there, paste it right in, and we're going to name this guy slider stop. There we go. I believe that was the name of the function we execute. Yes, slider stop F. And right down here, we just need to change a little line of code. We just need to say slider btn underscore mc dot stop drag and take the false out of the center there. Just open close parenthesis and a semicolon. So I check to make sure our script contains no errors, and it in fact is good to go. So I'm going to save my document. Control Enter, Command Return. Let's test this guy out, see what happens. You can see the icons show up. Don't worry about that. That's just because right now they're on top of our startup interface. We're going to take care of all that later. But for now, look at this. We can grab the button and drag it wherever we want and let go, and it works. It's great. Now, we need to continue coding. We need to set up some restrictions for this so it can only slide within our groove. Setting up these restrictions is a breeze. We're going to first create a rectangle in Actionscript, and we're going to say, hey, button, you are not allowed outside of this rectangle, these particular points set in Actionscript. Now, we're going to have to reference this groove to get, dimensions of the groove. We need dimensions of the button, things like that. So let's get started real quick in Actionscript. I'm going to come back to the Actionscript layer, hit F9 to bring up the Actions panel. I'm going to select all the way up here on line 1. And I'm going to hit enter a couple times, enter a return, that is, a couple times. And all the way up here at the top, I'm going to create a new variable, that'd be var. The name of the variable is going to be slider bind and a colon. The type of variable, is a rectangle, and it is equal to a new rectangle. If I can spell rectangle, there we go. Now, I need to put in a few bits of info about this rectangle. So I'm going to create an open parenthesis, and you can see here it's saying, okay, I need an X, which is going to be a number, I need a Y, and then I need a width and a height. So what's the starting X and Y of your rectangle? Well, you know what? I don't really know. So let's go back and figure that out. I'm going to close up the Actions panel. I'm going to select this slide to unlock a movie clip. I'm going to double click on it. And when I select this, notice right away our X and Y are 0. So within this movie clip, our X and Y are not the very top left corner of the document like you may think. Because remember, when we created this movie clip, we said make the registration point that top left point. So that within this movie clip becomes the 0x and 0y point. So that's kind of important because here, this button, you can see it's sitting 3 in on the x-axis and 3 down on the y-axis. So our x and y of this rectangle are going to be 3. We want the starting top left corner of our rectangle to be 3 on the x and 3 on the y. So with that in mind, we're going to head right back out to scene 1, select that Actionscript layer, open up the Actions panel. By the way, the hotkey for that is F9 if I have not mentioned it before. Open parenthesis, and we can just hit the number 3, comma, space, the number 3, comma. Now we need the width of our rectangle. Okay, how far over are we going to allow this button to slide? Well, let's close up the Actions panel, select this movie clip, double click it, and let's select the groove, and we can see that the width is 222. So hey, let's try 222 and see what happens, right? So let's try it. Back to the Actions panel, hit the F9 key, and just write 222. And the height, really, we can set that to 0 because we don't want this button to be able to move up and down at all. So, close parenthesis, semicolon, and now in order to basically say, all right, hey, you slider btn underscore mc, when somebody's clicked on you, okay, so now that brings us right down here within the slider drag function. When you start dragging, not only do I not want you to lock center, but I'm going to place a comma here, I want you to, your bounds, you can see here the tooltip is saying bounds. I want your bounds to be that variable we created called slider bind. Those are your bounds. So I'm going to hit F9 to close the Actions panel, and I know we're going to have a little problem here, but we're going to fix it. Control Enter, Command Return. Now when I drag this, you can see I can't go backward at all with the slider. I can go forward, but look, I can overshoot the groove. That's because if you think about it, we're saying you can go 222 off your 0x and your 0y. Well, you can see it brings us almost exactly a button width beyond the far edge of the groove. So we know we at least have to subtract the button width from, you know, the width of our rectangle. But not only do we have to do that, we need to subtract the button width, which I happen to know is 57. I know that offhand. But we also need to subtract the 3, it's 3 in on the x-axis on the side. So we essentially have 3 pixels, if you will, of padding on this side, and we want it to have that same 3 pixels of padding on this side. So this button, well, the button inside here, you can see the width is 57. We want to give it 3 pixels on this side, so that immediately brings the width up to 60. But we also want to give it 3 on this side, so that brings us up to 63. And that means we need to come over here and subtract 63 from 222, which I believe is 159. Let's try this. Command, Return, Control, Enter. Let's bring this guy over, and look at that. It looks like it was meant to be that way. Very nice. So our slider now slides very nicely through the groove, and we're ready to set it up so that when it gets to the other side of the groove, something happens. Let's do it. So first things first, before we get started, let's just test this out again. And the first thing you're going to realize is these icons show up above this background, which is basically because they're just above it in the layer stacking order. I do want it to stay that way, but we're just going to use Actionscript to hide them until we want them to appear. So I'm going to close this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the icons interface. You can see it's just shut off here, which is why we're not seeing it here within the Flash authoring tool. So I'm going to turn it back on, and I'm going to unlock it, and I'm going to select it, and I'm going to give it an instance name of icons. Well, try to spell icons correctly. Icons interface _ MC. Lock that guy right back up. Come up to the Actions panel, hit the F9 key, all the way up here at the top, actually right below the slider bind rectangle. We're just going to say icons interface _ MC dot visible. There we go. Space equals space, false. And close up the Actions panel. If we test it out now, look at that, they're gone. It is a miracle. So now, what we want to do, oh, did you just see that? You see that? When I let go, you can see how my mouse is not over the button, and I'm not even clicking down, and it's still sliding. So you know what? Let's come into the Actionscript, and let's throw that little dot stage into here and see if that helps us at all. I'm going to close up the Actions panel. Let's test this out, and drag it right off, and look at that. See that? When you add that little bit of code, now I can just let go anywhere I want, and it actually stops. Beautiful. So now that we've fixed that little issue, which I did happen to mention earlier on in the tutorial, and we've got our icons disappearing, let's make something happen when our slider gets all the way over to that 159 position. So I'm going to open this up, and basically I'm going to create a new event listener which just listens every single frame. Every time a frame in Flash is loaded, every time Flash enters a new frame, it's going to check to see if this is, if this has gotten to that point along the X axis. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply say add event listener. I'm just going to add a little bit of space beneath here so we're not crowding ourselves in. Add event listener, open parenthesis, event dot enter, try to spell enter correctly, enter frame, that's all in caps, comma, the function we want this to execute is just, it's going to be a function that contains an if statement. If this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. And it's just going to keep checking, and as long as it's not happening, nothing's going to happen. But when the condition happens, another function essentially is going to be executed. So this function here that is going to be checking, and we're just going to call it check slider X. So, just checking the X position of the slider, essentially. Now, I'm going to come down beneath these functions, enter return a couple times, and I'm going to create a new function. Function check slider X, and this is an event. This, however, is just a regular old event, not a mouse event. Colon void, as we've done so many times before, open curly bracket, enter return twice, close curly bracket, and the up arrow key. Now that I'm within this function, we're just going to type a simple if statement. So we're going to say if, open parenthesis. Now we need to reference the slider button, so we need to start with slider master _ MC dot slider what did I name it? Slider BTN. There it is, right up there above me. Slider BTN underscore MC dot X. Okay, so now we're saying if the X of this movie clip right here, which happens to be nested within this movie clip, if the X of that is equal to, and when you're in a conditional statement, you need to put two equal signs. So if it is equal to, we're going to say is greater than or equal to 159. Remember, that was also the width of our rectangle. So if it is greater to or equal to 159, close parenthesis, open curly bracket, enter return twice, close curly bracket, up arrow key. So we have our if statement here sitting within our function. So if the X of that slider is greater to or equal to 159, we're just going to send out a simple trace statement. Trace, open parenthesis, open and close quotes, close parenthesis, semicolon, and within those quotes, we're going to say load interface, exclamation point. And another thing we want to do is we just want to remove that event listener, which is checking every frame, because if we don't, this trace statement is going to go on and on and on and on. So I'm going to copy that add event listener. I'm going to paste it right down here beneath the trace statement, and I'm going to change the word add here to just remove. So remove event listener, event.enterFrame, check slider X. So now when we do this, I'm going to close up my actions panel, Control Enter, Command Return to export that movie. Let's slide it right on over, and you can see the output panel says, hey, load interface. That's great. Our conditional statement is working wonderfully, and we can get ready to set it to trigger some animation. Now, the animation, which our starting animation is basically going to be making this slider fade away and making our background image here. Well, let me shut off the icons interface to get that out of the way. It's kind of distracting. Making our image and the time and all that stuff fade away. We're going to use Actionscript to make all of that happen. So the first thing we really need to do is select the startup interface here, which happens to be hiding beneath the icons interface. I'm just going to select it, and it should, oh, it's locked. There we go. And when I select it here, you can see that it is a movie clip, and I want to give this an instance name. Let's give it an instance name of, well, why not go with something original like startup interface underscore MC. Sounds simple enough, and that's what we're going to stick with. So now our slider and our startup interface both have instance names. We need that because when we're creating these tweens, we basically need to say, okay, tween, go apply yourself to this movie clip. All right, I'm going to grab the actions layer here, hit F9 to open up the actions panel. I'm going to come down beneath all of these functions we've set up, hit enter return a couple times, and we're going to begin tweening. You know what, I'm going to move way down to keep you from getting distracted. I'm going to come up here to line 23. You know, obviously for you it doesn't matter what line you're on, but for me, I'm on line 23. And we're going to create these tweens. Now, using these tweens, we do need to import a couple classes, which we'll take care of in just a second, but let's create these tweens first. We're going to say var, and this is going to be the startup. We're going to call it startup fade, actually, and it is going to be a tween, and it's going to be equal to a new tween. Open parenthesis, and the movie clip being affected, or tween, is going to be startup interface underscore MC, and that's all, comma. We're going to say open and close parenthesis. We want to edit the alpha property of it, comma, and we're going to type strong dot ease, well, let's say ease out, comma, 1, because it's going to start at the alpha of 1, which in Flash CS4, CS3, in Actionscript 3.0, I should say, 1 is equal to 100. 1, and we want it to fade to 0. So essentially it's going to start where it is and just fade to nothing. And we want this to happen over the course of 3 seconds. And yes, in fact, those are seconds we are talking about, not milliseconds. And there we go. We have our first tween. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and hit the Home key, select that whole line of code, copy it, move down to the line beneath, and paste it in. So we will not have to redo this entire thing. We just need to change the movie clip being affected and the name of the tween. So I'm going to call this slider fade and call this, let's say, slider master underscore MC. All right? So, now that we've written this out, we're just going to select both of these lines of code and copy them. Actually, cut them, really. Right-click, cut. Because we need to bring these in here and just replace the trace statement. We want to leave the remove event listener there. We just want to get rid of the trace statement and hit Command or Control-V to paste those guys in. And I'm going to select over here, hit Tab to properly indent that. Get rid of this extra line of nothingness. And there we go. So when this slider hits or becomes greater than or equal to 159 on the x-axis, this stuff should just fade out. Let's check it out and see what happens. Control Enter Command Return, and hey, look at this. We've got some errors. That's right, because just a moment ago I told you we had to import those classes, which I forgot about. I did not import them. So come all the way up here to the top of the Actions panel. Enter Return twice, and up here on frame 1 we just need to type import.fl.transitions. There we go. .tween, and that's with a capital T. And place a semicolon there. Next, we're going to say import.fl.transitions again. .easing. Asterisk. So that's shifting the 8 key. And then a semicolon. So basically, those should import all of the classes we need. I'm going to hit F9 to close that. Save my Flash document command, or Control S. Control Enter Command Return, and we still have an error. It's going to say, hey, I was expecting an identifier before the dot. Yes, that's because I made a very dumb mistake, which I do a lot. You actually don't need to. Well, you can't put a period after the import. It just has to be a space. And save that. Control Enter Command Return. We have no errors now. That's looking good. We're going to make this slider go across, and look at that. It all fades out. Beautiful. So now we need to set up our icons. We need them all to sort of slide in and do their thing and really reappear when this thing slides over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the slider interface back on, and I'm going to unlock it. Alright, so we're just going to head into this movie clip. We're going to tween this stuff really quickly, not spend too much time worrying about exact positioning, yada, yada, yada. We just want to set this up, so basically this is going to play, fade everything right in, and just do some simple timeline tweening. So, I'm going to select this, double-click it to get inside of it. I'm going to move my timeline down a little bit. I'm going to hit Command or Control A to select everything inside of it. Right-click, Distribute to Layers. I'm going to get rid of Layer 1 here. That is junk. And I'm basically going to start selecting these layers and converting them into movie clips. I'm going to select the left icons, lefternmost, I don't think that's even a word, leftern icons, there I go again, the icons to the left, let's not worry about proper grammar for a moment, MC, left icons, and I'm going to select the right hand icons, and try not to delete them like that, hit F8 to convert them to a symbol, MC, right icons, and I'm going to select the icons down on the dock, create a symbol out of them, MC dock icons, and the actual dock beneath those icons, and there's a little gray bar there too, the little lower title bar, so both of them, and hit F8, and we're going to say MC dock. There we go, beautiful. Drag this up. I'm going to get rid of this blank layer here, and well, not add a layer. I want to get rid of the blank layer. I want these animations to go on for maybe a half second. So I really want to just try to, snap right into place, and there's not going to be too much that you're really going to notice. Just sort of, wow, they just sort of shot in there. So what we're going to do is come out to the 15 frame mark. I'm going to hit the F5 key, or you can just right click and say Insert Frame. It fills that out with frames, and we're going to select all 4 of these first keyframes. I'm just clicking and dragging over them like that. I'm going to hold down the Alt or the Option key and click and drag them out and drop them on the 15 frame mark. You can see we've just duplicated those keyframes. So now on the first keyframes of each of these layers, okay, let's start with the title bar. I'm going to hold down my Shift key and just nudge that down below a few times, just like that. I'm going to select these icons, hold down my Shift key and nudge them to the right, just like that. These guys, I'm not going to hold in the Shift key. I'm just going to click and drag them up and to the left. Same with these. I'm going to drag them up and to the right, like so. All right, now all we need to do is select all of inside of here, right-click, and hit Create Classic Tween. Not Motion Tween, Classic Tween. If you're using anything older than Flash CS4, this will be a Motion Tween. But for us using Flash CS4, Classic Tween is what we want. So you can see here, voila, everything snaps right into place. I'm actually going to select all 4 tweens like so, and crank the easing up. Ease them out quite a bit. So there you go. They just sort of fall right into place very nicely. Next, we want to do 2 things. Number 1, we want this to be stopped when you initially see it. Otherwise, this will just play over and over and over again. So let's create a new layer. Name it AS for Actionscript. And here on the first keyframe, hit F9. We're just going to type the word stop. There we go. And we also probably want to place a stop action on the final frame. So I want to hit, well, I'm just going to stretch this up and right-click, insert blank keyframe, or you can insert a keyframe, really, it doesn't matter. Blank keyframe or keyframe, because there's nothing on the layer, it's going to be blank. And again, F9 to bring up the actions panel, and the word stop, open and close parenthesis, semicolon, F9 to close up that actions panel. We also, man, this is bearing in mind a moment ago, more than a moment ago, many minutes ago, that we don't have a background behind these icons. So when this photo behind this disappears, we have no background. So we really need to throw a background behind this. I'm going to create a new layer here. And I want to drag it beneath the lower title bar because this is going to be our background. I'm going to double click on it, just name it BG for background. I'm going to grab the rectangle tool. I want to make sure I've got no stroke, so I just want that little thumbnail with the cross going through it. And I want my fill color to be black. I'm going to draw out just any old rectangle. But I have specific dimensions for it though, so X and Y don't matter. The width, let me see here, I've got it written down somewhere. Here we go, 266 by 395 apparently is what's going to work very nicely for us. I'm going to bring this in and place it right in here. I'm going to move it over a little bit. And what I want to do is I'm going to zoom in because I really want to make sure I have this aligned nicely with the edge of my metal frame. And I do in fact have it aligned very nicely. Beautiful. Perfect. Okay, I just want to move down, make sure I've got it where I want it to be. And yes, in fact, everything's looking pretty good. Okay, so also one other very important thing is we need to make sure we mask all of this to just the screen area of the iPhone, because if we don't, when it comes time for this to play, we're going to see these icons floating in from, out in, nowhere land, just in the white space. So we don't want to see that. So I'm going to select this background, Command or Control C to copy it, come up above these icons, create a new layer, double click on that layer, name it Mask, and I'm going to select that first keyframe, and pasting in place is Control Shift or Command Shift V. Simply right click on that mask layer, and we're going to be moving off screen. Let me stretch this up. Right click, hit mask. Okay, we've just masked our first layer. Click and drag right icons, drag it up. You can see it's going to attach that beneath. Just when you get that black line, let go. So all of our tweened layers, we just want to hook up underneath this mask and make sure they all get locked. You're going to see that's immediately going to make them all disappear. That's great because you can see, look at that. Now they all slide right into place like they're supposed to. And there's a stop action there to catch them and make sure they stop. So finally, for the end of this, how do we finally make this play? Well, go back to scene 1, and we have 2 very simple lines of code to add to our action script. Hit F9 after selecting the action script layer. Come all the way down here, and you remember we set up these tweens here earlier. Well, I'm going to select in front of the remove event listener, because what I want to do is place this code between this tween and this event listener. All right, so we're going to say icons interface underscore MC dot visible space equals space true. Okay, so what once wasn't now is icons interface. So it is now visible, but remember we have that stop action, so you really won't be able to see it yet. So now we need to say, hey, icons interface, not only are you allowed to show your face, you are also allowed to play. And it's going to play right through to that stop action where it will, you guessed it, stop. Alright, so I'm going to save this, and let's Command or Control Enter to test this out, and let's see what happens here. I'm going to drag this over, and look at that. It is a miracle. And you can see that everything fades out nicely, and at this point, you could go ahead, you could make these icons do all kinds of different things. It's really up to you. You now know how to do this. What you may want to do first is use this button here to be able to back yourself back out, or I don't have an iPhone, I don't even have an iPod Touch, so I'm not 100% sure of how that works, but someday maybe I will have the privilege of knowing. But, however you initially get back to that screen, maybe you want to set it up, or maybe if you're like me who would go ahead and set this button up to do that and be completely wrong, you can do that. But for now, just setting up that slider, you can see it took a few minutes to do, but it works like a charm. That is how you create a slide to unlock feature. And really this can be used in anything. You can use it in your website. You can use, obviously, you can use it wherever you normally use Flash in all its glory. So that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly hope you learned something. And if you enjoyed it, or if you didn't enjoy it, please go check out the website. That's www.tutvid.com. And I thank you for watching.